In 2019, McKinsey settled with the state of Massachusetts for its role in advising Purdue Pharma on how to, quote, turbocharge OxyContin sales. What the settlement documents also showed was that during overlapping years, McKinsey held active contracts with the Food and Drug Administration, the same agency responsible for regulating opioids. Both clients, one firm. McKinsey & Company was founded in Chicago in 1926 by James O. McKinsey, a University of Chicago accounting professor who believed that management itself could be made into a science. By the 1950s, the firm had advised the British government on restructuring the National Health Service. By the 1970s, it was embedded in the executive suites of nearly every Fortune 500 company in America. By the 1990s, it had become something else entirely, a permanent presence inside governments that technically had no need to hire outside consultants because they already employed thousands of specialists on the public payroll. That expansion into the public sector was not accidental. McKinsey built a dedicated government practice, eventually advising over 100 governments worldwide simultaneously. The pitch was always the same: private sector discipline applied to public sector inefficiency. Governments hired them because it looked serious, it looked modern, and critically, when things went wrong, the blame dissolved into a consulting report that no court could easily hold accountable. McKinsey's contracts with federal agencies in the United States alone exceeded $1 billion between 2010 and 2020, according to federal procurement data compiled by Good Jobs First. Here is where the architecture of the problem becomes visible. McKinsey does not disclose its private sector client list. It never has. This is not unusual for a consulting firm. What is unusual is that McKinsey simultaneously accepts public contracts from regulatory bodies, the FDA, the Department of Defense, ICE, the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, bodies whose decisions directly control the market conditions that McKinsey's private clients operate inside. A firm advising a regulator on procurement efficiency while advising the regulated industry on growth strategy is not consulting. It is arbitrage. It is selling access to both sides of a wall that exists to keep them apart. The first documented crack appeared not in a newsroom, but in a bankruptcy court. When Purdue Pharma filed for Chapter 11 protection in September 2019, it was required to surface internal communications. Those documents showed McKinsey had advised Purdue between 2004 and 2019, including a 2017 presentation recommending Purdue offer rebates to distributors for every OxyContin overdose, a proposal that reduced financial risk for the supply chain, while the human cost externalized onto emergency rooms and families. In a separate set of federal procurement records, researchers at the New York Times identified McKinsey contracts with the FDA's Center for Drug Evaluation and Research during years that directly overlapped with the Purdue engagement. McKinsey has never denied the overlap. It has never been required to explain it. The mechanism is not subtle once you see it whole. McKinsey does not merely consult, it occupies both sides of the table simultaneously, and it has the internal architecture to make sure neither hand has to officially know what the other is doing. The firm calls this structure a firewall. What the documented record shows is something closer to a revolving door built inside a single building. In 2019, the United States Bankruptcy Court for the Southern District of New York found that McKinsey had failed to disclose connections to at least 200 entities with interests in the bankruptcy cases, where the firm served as a court-appointed advisor. Federal bankruptcy judge David Jones used the word concealment, not oversight, concealment. The Purdue Pharma engagement is where the architecture becomes a body count. Between 2004 and 2019, McKinsey billed Purdue Pharma approximately $75 million. The work was specific. Internal McKinsey slide decks produced in the Massachusetts Attorney General's investigation showed consultants proposing to turbocharge OxyContin sales at the precise pharmacies identified as high-volume opioid dispensers. Locations regulators had already flagged. One slide proposed a rebate system that would pay distributors for every overdose that could be attributed to their pills, framing a public health catastrophe as a financial reconciliation mechanism. During overlapping years, McKinsey held advisory contracts with the Food and Drug Administration on drug distribution policy and operations. The FDA engagement was taxpayer-funded. The Purdue engagement was not disclosed to the FDA. In February 2021, McKinsey reached a settlement of approximately $600 million with 47 state attorneys general. The firm admitted no wrongdoing. The same structural pattern appeared inside the United States immigration detention system. McKinsey's work for immigration and customs enforcement, documented through contracts totaling approximately $20 million between 2017 and 2018, focused on reducing per-detainee operational costs. A 2019 investigation by ProPublica and the New York Times documented the consequences. Food budgets cut to approximately $1.50 per detainee per day, reduced access to medical personnel, staffing levels dropped in facilities already flagged by government inspectors. During the same period, McKinsey held consulting relationships with GEO Group and Core Civic, the two largest private prison and detention operators in the United States, companies whose contract value increased as government alternatives became less viable. Congressional investigators requested McKinsey's conflict of interest disclosures on these simultaneous engagements. The firm declined to provide them. The people who could have interrupted this looked away with documented consistency. The FDA had McKinsey's own consultants in its buildings during the peak years of opioid policy formation. The agency's chief information officer from 2015 to 2019 came from McKinsey. The firm's alumni placed in senior positions at the Department of Health and Human Services, the Office of Management and Budget, and state Medicaid agencies created a professional social network that functioned as institutional insulation. The Government Accountability Office reviewed McKinsey's federal contracting practices in 2019 and found insufficient conflict of interest documentation across multiple agencies. The finding generated 2 pages of coverage and no contractual consequences. McKinsey's federal billings continued. The point of no return is not a metaphor. It is a date. On October 21, 2020, Purdue Pharma pleaded guilty to federal criminal charges under the Controlled Substances Act. 8 members of the Sackler family agreed to pay $831 million in civil penalties. Approximately 500,000 Americans were already dead from opioid overdoses since the OxyContin launch in 1996. McKinsey had been present at the architecture of that distribution system for 15 of those years, had taken $75 million in fees, had written the slides, had run the numbers. The firm's settlement came 4 months after Purdue's guilty plea. By the time $600 million moved out of McKinsey's accounts and into state coffers, the firm had already won new federal contracts. The mechanism had not been dismantled. It had been fined. In 2021, McKinsey reached a settlement of nearly $600 million with attorneys general from 47 states over its work for Purdue Pharma. The firm had advised Purdue on how to, in its own documented words, turbocharge opioid sales, while simultaneously holding contracts with federal health agencies. No McKinsey partner was criminally charged. No individual consultant faced prosecution. The firm issued no admission of wrongdoing beyond what the settlement required. The money was paid, the press cycle moved on, and McKinsey continued operating government contracts within months of the agreement being finalized. The FDA engagements have never produced a formal investigation. The ICE consulting work, which internal documents show was focused on reducing per-detainee costs, while McKinsey held concurrent contracts with private detention operators, was reported in detail by the New York Times in 2019. Congress sent letters. Hearings were scheduled. Nothing was subpoenaed. The partners who led those engagements were not named in any legal proceeding. Several moved into senior roles at the firms and institutions they had previously advised. The revolving door did not slow, it was lubricated. McKinsey today holds active contracts with governments on 6 continents. It remains one of the largest advisors to the United States federal government. There is no structural rule prohibiting a consulting firm from advising a regulator and its regulated industry in the same sector at the same time. The settlement closed the legal exposure. It closed nothing else. The firm that helped design the architecture of the opioid crisis paid a fine that amounted to roughly 3 weeks of its annual revenue and kept its security clearances. What side of that table do you think your government is actually sitting on? Leave it in the comments. We want to know where you land. If you found this useful, subscribe now, because every week we expose another system they hoped you would never understand.